Our planet and our civilization are at stake. This is our humanness is at stake right now. There are very specific steps in deprogramming from a cult that apply to what we're talking about here. Unplugging from unhealthy social media is a big part of that. Recognizing that one of the ways that a cult will entice people is they will convince them that there is no other way, that it's their way or they're going to lose everything. Well, we see climate activists saying the planet's dead in 10 years if you don't do these things. Impressionable young people believe that, and they don't want their planet to die. And so they're going to act radically. I think we have just seen the result of this in an attempted on the president, from a rhetoric that is inciting people with things that simply are not true about what happens if one man is allowed to move into office. And I'm not saying that man is the best man for the job. What I'm saying is we have seen the consequence of information in the media that has been drilled into the minds and the hearts of vulnerable young people that don't have the maturity to think critically and to question what they're being told. And it is that is driving it. It's destroying our country right now. There is a battle to geoengineer our planet into conditions that, I'll just say it like this, they simply are not good for us as humans. I mentioned this in January of this year. I did a little experiment, and I plugged in all of the geophysical parameters that are the goals of the UN and the WEF. If we meet those carbon goals, if we meet those temperature goals. And I just said, okay, Greg, stop pushing back for a moment, embrace it. What would the world look like? So I ran this on a geologic time scale, and to my astonishment, good and evil is at the foundation of the battle. It sometimes plays out in a way that is kinetic, where we see action, armies against armies, and sometimes it is in a way that is non-kinetic. It's insidious because it is a psychological battle. I know you've talked about this, Sean, on your program. This battle is playing out. We all know there's a battle for our thoughts. There's a battle for our beliefs. There's a battle for our bodies. We've seen that play out over these last few years. But the battle I'm talking about is for something that is even deeper than that. There is literally a battle for our very humanness, because it is through the human body in this world that we access a force that is so rare and so precious and so beautiful and so powerful that organizations, people will go to any length to veil that power from us. Nations have gone to war against nations to distract us from this power that lives within us. It's happening now. Armies have defeated armies. Societies have been leveled. Financial systems have been collapsed. Climate has been engineered. Diseases have been unleashed. Lies have been told and they've been accepted, all in an effort to keep us distracted so that we are veiled from the essence of this force and this power that is within us. Now, we mentioned this briefly in another podcast. Some of you may not have been with us. So the force I'm talking about is a force that is human divinity. When people hear the word divinity, they often think of religion. And I can see why, because there are schools of divinity and it is often linked with divinity, religious traditions. But when you look at the definition, it's really interesting, John. The definition of divinity, it is the ability to transcend perceived human limitations. That's all it is. But people in the circles that we are familiar with and whose information we've read, the books we've read, videos we've seen, that believe that everything I just said is separate from what's happening in America today, or everything I've said is separate from what's happening in the world today. Well, there's an intensification for this battle because we are just a few short years from this 2030 window. And by the way, this is still part of the 2012 phenomenon. When I wrote the book, it was a book called Fractal Time, and I released it in 2010, 2 years before the 2012 phenomenon. I wanted to give people a heads up. And in that, I identify this phenomenon when a cycle of any kind, a cycle in a human relationship, a marriage, a cycle of health, a cycle of abundance in finance or jobs or cosmic cycles. It's the same thing. When they end, they don't end on a dime. There is a buffer, a window between the time that one cycle winds down and the other one winds up. And there is a factor, a mathematical factor that you can apply to the length of the cycle. If the cycle is 20 years or the cycle is 5,000 years, you apply this mathematical constant and it will tell you the buffer. We talk about that in the book. Well, the buffer for the year 2012, interesting, it's a 36-year long buffer for a cycle that's 5,125 years long. 36 years, 18 years before 2012, 18 years after 2012. And of course, that 18 years after is the year 2030. It also happens to coincide with some cosmological events incoming. A dear friend of mine, dear brother, before he passed, his name was Paul LaViolette, and he was writing about the volley of cosmic radiation that shoots through our universe at very specific intervals of time. And sadly, his work, he didn't see the acceptance during his lifetime that it is now receiving. One of those volleys, you can't nail it to a day or a month, but one of those volleys is a factor of the 5,000-year cycle and the 26,000-year cycle of our precession, the equinoxes. So all to say, there are things converging on the year 2030. The powers that be know that. They're jockeying for position. They're jockeying for power to be in the best place in a number of parameters when that happens. So good and evil. Sometimes it is a philosophic battle. Sometimes it becomes kinetic. What we saw in Israel on October 7th, I was in London the day that it happened, and I saw the raw footage before it started being edited by the networks. And it wasn't about Israelis and Palestinians. This was pure evil that was unleashed in a way that I never thought that I would see in my lifetime. It's not allowed to be seen or even to be known in the United States. Social media platforms won't allow it. Community guidelines won't allow it. Now the mainstream narratives won't allow it. But it was an example of evil rearing its ugly head in a very kinetic manner. You know, when you think about it, kinetic wars happen because people believe in those wars, or the powers that be believe there's a need for them. All of that is based upon the way we've been taught to think. And what's happening right now, I know it's happening, and I'm still in awe of how efficient it is. And John, you've nailed this, and I haven't seen every one of your podcasts. I've seen you talk about this enough. Is that the psychological warfare that is happening in the world through social media, and America is leading the charge on this, is the powers that be know that to meet the goals for this 2030 series of events, America, as America has been in the past, cannot be allowed to exist, because the freedoms that we have been given as a nation, and I'm going to talk about these quite a bit here in just a moment, those freedoms are so rare, they are so precious, and they are so empowering that if the population is allowed to exercise those freedoms, that the visions and the agendas for this 2030 convergence, they can't happen. America, I've actually heard it called the problem of America. The way that this battle is being waged is to destroy America from within. And it is happening in a way, and I'm not saying that everyone who is involved is even aware they're involved. Many in the layers of power are pawns. Some of them are well-intentioned pawns. They don't know because they're looking here. They're not looking at the big picture. This is where systems thinking comes in. So there is a concerted effort to break the social bonds that have kept America together as a union in our diversity so successfully for such a long period of time. And I know if you're watching this, you probably say, well, what kind of bonds are those? It's been happening for a while, but it kicked into high gear right around 2011, when the battle between the rich and the poor, Occupy movement, the 1% and 99%. Here's where it gets so insidious, is because there is a discrepancy. It does need to be discussed. It can be remedied, but that's not what happened. The discrepancy was weaponized to divide us rather than allowed to be the catalyst to bring us to a closer union. And we all said it's still happening. It's still happening today. And then that was followed with the weaponization of the differences between men and women and the Me Too movement. An important movement, a conversation that needed to be had. We still need to have this. Now our trust in our own government, our trust. We don't know what's happening with our president. We don't know what is happening with this election that's coming up. We all have suspicions. We have bits and pieces. But this is the point. It's the suspicion that destroys, the lack of trust that destroys not just the nation. That's happening at the dinner table between kids and their parents, or between a husband and a wife, because the information silos that have been designed to keep us isolated in our personal echo chamber of what we believe to be true. It is reinforced through the algorithms to the point where what we see, we think is true, and the person next to us believes that what they've seen is true, and they're so passionate about it. This is how you destroy a nation, and it's how you destroy a society. It's how you destroy families. Ultimately, it's how you destroy a species, because part of this is that we're being conditioned to believe that we're a weak, flawed, powerless species, and that makes us victims. And as victims, we need a savior. And our savior is being touted as technology that we embrace and allow into our bodies, not just in the world around us. We're being persuaded, convinced, in some cases mandated, to accept technology into our bodies. And here's where this changes, John. We've never seen this before.